everybody. I pray this video finds you blessed. So this week I have this huge Buckeye Burl. Thank you so much, Mike, for this Buckeye Burl. This came from Texas, and Marilyn and Gerry brought it to me from Texas on their way home, so I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. There were so many possibilities with this piece, and I racked my brain for weeks and weeks and weeks trying to decide what I was going to do with it. So I figured, well, getting it all cleaned off and seeing what's underneath all the bark and everything would be a good start. So it took me several hours, but I managed to get all the rocks and dirt and bark and everything else out of it. After several weeks of staring at it and trying to decide what I wanted to do with it, I finally come up with an idea. The lumps and things like that reminded me of the stalactites and stalagmites that you see in caves. Well, I wanted to do a kind of a scenery thing with it being an underwater cave. I went on Google and searched underwater stalactites and stalagmites and was very inspired by several of the images that I saw, and was hoping that I could kind of recreate that natural underworld by using this burl. So I start off by cutting a rounded out piece, barely fit on my bandsaw, and I had to cut those two pieces in half, and I didn't have this wouldn't fit in my bandsaw, and I didn't have any other saw at the time. I do now after this mess. I finally bought a good handsaw, but anyways, I was afraid. I have a Sawzall and I used it towards the end, but I was afraid because a lot of places on this were very brittle and very crumbly, so I was hoping to not have to use any power tools that could possibly rip those pieces off. So that's why I'm doing it kind of the hard way. I knew once I started turning this burl that I would probably have to do penetrating sealer on the piece as I went, but I decided to go ahead and coat it now because then I can add, make the wood a little bit more stiffer as much as I possibly could in those really soft areas. And I added some Pearl X interference blue to help kind of give a shimmer to what would be stalactites, stalagmites. A lot of the photos I pulled up, they had a shimmer to them, so that's kind of what I was going for. And plus, the penetrating resin really helps to seal up all those nooks and crannies that otherwise would probably cause air bubbles. For the top side of the mold, I bought this acrylic plexiglass stuff from Lowe's. It was like $20 or something. It's not cheap. I just cut it out on my bandsaw. It cut just fine on the bandsaw. You got to be careful because it will crack if you put too much pressure on it. Sanded around the edges just to kind of take off that plastic roughness. And then for the back side of the mold, I used a corrugated plastic cardboard that I got from Lowe's as well. These were like $5. They're not cheap either, but I needed something that was not going to be too terribly hard to get off. And I didn't really need to see through it, so it was a cheaper alternative that was big enough. I didn't have any plastic that was big enough. After positioning the burl where I'd like it to be, I just used a little bit of hot glue to kind of tack it down to the plexiglass portion, and then put the plastic corrugated cardboard on top and get that put down as even and best I can get it lined up. For the sides of the molds, I use a chopping mat, plastic chopping mats I get from the Dollar Tree. And there's 3 in a pack, so it's a great deal for especially for resin casting for these things, and they come off the resin pretty easily. And also the hot glue. It comes off the hot glue pretty easily too when taking it all apart. And they can be reusable as long as you don't tear them up too bad when you remove your molds. I probably went through a whole package of hot glue sticks for this project. I didn't want to take the risk of it leaking, and it was a very inexpensive way of giving me that kind of insurance. So I used as much hot glue as that hot glue gun could squirt out of it. Lots of hot glue and tape. I taped around the whole circumference just to kind of keep the sides from wanting to bulge out. I wasn't quite sure, never done a mold this way, so I didn't really know what to expect, and I was just kind of trying to think ahead of what I assumed would happen or could happen, and just try to do as much as I could with what I had to eliminate any kind of issues or problems or leaks. Especially leaks definitely would be horrible. So I'm using hot glue and duct tape all around the bottom edge because it's not perfect. You know, in there, the edges kind of like bulged out in some weird ways, and so I just used tape to kind of like fill that gap. It worked perfectly. And for holding the mold upright, because that's how I was going to pour it, I just took 2 pieces of scrap wood and cut out the bottom of it the shape of the circular mold, and so that way I can hot glue those down onto it, and it would hold the piece upright while I was pouring it and while it was curing. Worked perfectly. So I chose the Burl that kind of had a hole in the very top of it that went all the way through the piece, so I knew when I poured the resin it would go all the way down to the bottom. And here's a picture of kind of like an inspiration. I didn't copy the colors exactly because I wanted mine to look like it was completely underwater, not just the top half being out of water and the bottom half. So needless to say, pouring the colors and getting them graduated was, you know, getting the color right in the first place was one of those just throw colors in there. So I didn't keep track. I didn't keep track of the colors on what I used. I kind of just went by eye and graduated it with my eye. Now with thickset, Total Boat's thickset resin, which is what I used for this project, it's the resin you can use if you don't have a pressure pot. Now, as you can see, I'm pointing out these big air bubbles, and you can see my plexiglass, my acrylic glass got so hot that it actually, you know, melted it and kind of warped it a little bit. And that's because you're supposed to only pour about a thick or 1 inch thick pour at a time. So I kind of went a little overboard with my first 2 pours. I poured them both right on top of each other, and it was definitely more than 1 inch thick, and it got too hot. The resin, the more you pour, the more the exothermic reaction will happen, and therefore it gets hotter and will definitely cure a lot faster. I had to bring the piece in the house because it started getting really cold, and I started noticing some hazy bubbles that weren't coming out of the resin, because when I was mixing it, because it's cold, it's has a lot more bubbles in it when you mix it when it's really cold. So I brought it inside to finish all of the pours, and like I said, I'm just kind of gradually lightening the color and kind of getting into the greens and yellows, and I know you can see the lines. I know you can see where the pours were, and I'm okay with that, because at this rate, how I had to pour this piece and what I had in mind, it was kind of a necessary evil to have these different color variations. And I think it adds some neatness to it, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I guess it's all in personal taste. I don't mind it. It is one of those, darn, you know, I wish it blended better, but you can't pour this whole thing at once. Matter of fact, the total amount of resin I used for this project was 6,394 grams. Yes, I said 6,394 grams. That is a lot of resin. I am ever so thankful to Total Boat for sending me extra gallons of thickset so that a way I can complete this project. It was several months of just pouring. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but when I would get some time, I would go in and sit down and do another pour and let that cure, because it takes about a 24 hours to cure, and I didn't want to overheat it again. I didn't want to cause myself some more problems later on down the road, and it also kind of gave me a chance to kind of stare at it and see how I wanted to go to variate with the colors. So it's yeah, thank you so much, Total Boat, for sending me the resin and allowing me this opportunity to just experience this project, let alone, you know, make it. I'll explain a little bit more at the end about the resin and mixing it and all that jazz. So at the end, stay if you're interested in some more details or technical details about the resin. Stick around and I will explain a little bit more. I took the mold off of it off camera because it literally took me forever. It took so long. There was a lot of places that were just stubborn and stuck, but I eventually got it, and I just figured it would be way too much filming just to take the mold off. I didn't, you know, do it any special way. All of the acrylic did break getting it off, so just to give you a heads up that, you know, that may happen. So I had, because of the resin getting hot, it did cause the acrylic to warp, and so therefore the front of it, the part that I needed to mount on the lathe first, was warped and needed to be flattened. So I just took like a 36 grit sandpaper and just flattened that out, marked my center, and used Total Boat's Fast Set to adhere it to my waste block. And I just let that sit overnight. This was a feat in just getting it flattened and mounted. So I was kind of happy with just that progress and trying to take it slow so that way I don't rush through and create more mistakes or problems for myself to solve later, and trying to just make all this work mean something in the end. Howdy, everybody. So first of all, thank you so much, Mike, for this amazing burl. Look how huge this thing is. Now that's with the chunk taken out. And thank you, Marilyn and Gerry, for bringing this down to me. I truly appreciate it, and got plenty left, and already have some plans for this burl that I have left over. So thank you so much. Okay, so this video is packed full of a lot of new experiences for me, and I'm sure a lot of you have some questions, especially on the Total Boat thick set. And so I want to take this time to kind of like just go over some things that maybe I might have questions myself if I were to begin. Now, the thick set is a 3-to-1 ratio. It can be used outside of a pressure pot. It takes a lot more time to cure, so 24 hours, and that all depends on how much you mix. I weigh my resin, and so the ratio for the 3-to-1 is 100 grams of the resin to 28 grams of the hardener. That's how I weigh it out when I mix it. No more than 512 grams total in one container. And that goes for the 2-to-1 as well. You don't want to mix too much in one container. The chemical reaction is called an exothermic reaction. It creates heat. That's what cures the resin, is heat. With thickset, it is only an inch that you can pour at one time. And then don't assume because you have a big long table and you're only going to pour an inch that you can mix both containers all at once, because like I said, the more you mix in one container makes the exothermic reaction happen faster. Now, I've never done a river table or anything large to that magnitude to be able to judge and gauge by my experience to tell you, but just with smaller pours, like, well, this is kind of a large pour, but with smaller pours compared to a river table, I would not recommend mixing a ton in one container at once. So the max I have found that works is about 512 grams, and that's if that's necessary for your project. Of course, you can mix less. So you notice in the beginning of my pour, I had mixed 512 grams, but because the bottom part was so small, the resin was stacked like on top of each other, a lot more than an inch. And I should have taken that a little slower, and I just didn't think about it and just poured. So therefore I have those little bubbles. It does look neat considering the piece and what it's looking like, what I want it to look like. But obviously it's gonna pose me a challenge later on when I start to turn it, and I'm gonna have to fill that. So just keep that in mind. You might want to get in a big hurry, but it's better just to take it slow. That's why it took me so long to pour this project, because I didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to do what I started out doing and pouring way too much. Make sure you mix it in a warmer, resin likes warmer environments, and I leave my resin in my shop because I don't have any place else to put it, and it's not temperature controlled out here. So I had to bring everything inside and start mixing it, which worked a lot better. The first couple of pours, when it was colder, I started noticing a lot of like hazier bubbles, and those will cure in the resin because there's just too many of them to try to get it out. With this Burl, it was very punky. That's why I chose to use the penetrating resin to seal it really good first, because I didn't want bubbles to kind of pop up later on in the resin in the curing and pose some more challenges. So sealing it as much as I possibly can before putting it in resin was definitely a must for me in my project. Now, if you don't have penetrating resin, you can always do a sanding sealer. Just make sure that when you apply any kind of sealers to it, to the wood piece, to make sure it's completely and 100% dry, because then you will get foamy type bubbles all around your wet areas in your pour. Resin and water do not like each other. Even the residual moisture sitting on pieces will cause that bubbly, foamy. It just does not respond good, never, with pieces with moisture in it. So I had to do this video in two-part because I'm not even finished turning this thing yet. I just got to the back side of it this past weekend, and it took me over all day all day just to turn the back side. It was beating me up. It's the Buckeye Burl is very light and the resin is a lot heavy, and of course it's never going to really be balanced because of the weight of the piece itself and how unequally weighted it is. So it's posing a challenge, and I'm just, you know, going with the flow and doing my best to get it to somewhat of the shape that I originally had in mind. Hopefully get this done by next week so I can share it with you. And if not, then I will just have it put up as soon as it's finished. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek of what I got going on so far. So this is what I got so far. Just the backside. I have penetrating resin sitting on it, so that way I can go in and start sanding. And I had to fill some craters because there's obviously some craters inside that burl that the resin could not get to. So it's turning out beautiful. I can't wait. So there's a few tips that I hope are helpful. If you have any questions, please put them down below. I'll do my best to be able to answer them by typing them out. It's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to word things sometimes for me when I'm trying to explain stuff because I'm so much better at talking. Anywho, thank you guys for sticking in there and watching this first half of this video. Hopefully I'll get the second half up next week and it will be done. This is such a long project for me, and I'm looking forward to what it's going to end up being like. So y'all have a wonderful weekend. Take care. God bless.